It's ad break time. I'm proud to announce that the Beyond Solitaire podcast is sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. They just successfully funded their most recent game, Greg Loring Albright's Keep the Faith, which is a light RPG about the growth of a religion. If you missed the campaign, do keep an eye out for a chance to late pledge in the coming weeks. Also, if you'd like to support Beyond Solitaire, please head to patreon.com/Beyond Solitaire to help me keep the lights on. For now, though, enjoy the show. Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and this week on the pod I have a very special guest. This is game designer and author Mark Herman. Mark, I feel like you're really long overdue for this podcast. I'm super happy to have you on. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well.
So I brought you on because we're going to talk about Wargames According to Mark, which is a book that you put out through GMT pretty recently. So I guess
I should note that it sold out.
Well done. Is it going to go back on the P500? Is it going to work? Is it going to work like a game in that sense?
Yeah, but it's going to be the P1000 because the books are a little bit different than the unit cost is figured around 1,000. But we'll see if there's any more interest or we're done. I don't know. But we did sell out of the first print run, so I feel like there was some interest.
Yeah, that's got to feel good. So when you wanted to do a book, what led you to publish it through GMT instead of through like a traditional book publisher?
So there's a couple of pieces to this. So when you publish a book, with a publisher, they have contracts, right? And because of my background, I won't go into. I have a real business background, especially in game publishing. Like I ran a game publishing company. I used to do copyrights and trademarks for SPI when I was very young. Yeah, I understand the basic process of IP and all that. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm pretty good at this stuff. And all of the contracts that I saw, basically, I gave up my my IP rights pretty much for the rest of my life because of the way they have this clause in these contracts. People should know that it says if they take any part, they're allowed to take any part of your book and then reference it into another book, and they don't have to give back the rights until all copies of all books and all references to your material has been used. Is like out of print.
Whoa.
There you go. So when I saw that, I was like, I'm not doing this. I didn't want to do it. Then there was a good publisher in UK. It was a fair contract, but it was like a print and play. It was like, it just wasn't going to get anything. And then a good friend suggested, why don't you just talk to GMT? And so I talked to GMT, and they were game for it. And so I own the IP rights, and GMT and I have a very fair split. Split the money after all costs are taken care of. I wasn't trying to get rich on this. I just wanted to get it out and not give up the rights to it. And so that's why GMT, and it's been, and Kai Jensen, I want to just mention, who is the production. She did a phenomenal job getting it produced in Korea. And so the book is really high. If you've held the book, I mean, it's a real high quality book. It's not like some flimsy book.
Yeah, it's gonna be a great paperweight one day. I'm joking.
I mean, at some point, it's not the Bible, right? So it's going to get read if anything once, and that's it. I mean, I get it.
No, I tease. Truly though, it's got some heft, and yeah, I mean, it's got really nice page quality. The binding looks good. The pictures look good. Yeah, it came out really well.
Yeah, so I give that credit to Kai Jensen for all that.
She can be trusted with all matters of production, from what I can tell.
Mm-hmm. That's a true statement.
So for people who have not taken a look at Wargames According to Mark yet, and maybe they would like to go try to scrounge up a copy now, what is the book basically about, and what did you intend for it to do?
Well, so let's start off what I didn't intend for it to be. It is not a here's the proper way to design a war game. It is not that. But what it really is my personal view of how I design a war game. And I wanted to put that down, encapsulate it, and as I wrote in I think it's the second sentence of the introduction, I really wrote it for my grandchildren. So someday, or great grandchildren will say, "Who is this guy?" And they have some. They could see what I was, relative to my profession. They could say, "Okay, so this is how he thought about doing this." And so that's why I wrote the book. Um, and so there it is. Now everybody else can read it, but it is specifically my view of how to do things. But I say it multiple times in the book. I know you've read it. It's not every designer does it differently, and there's no right or wrong way to do this, But this is how I do it, so I can at least be authentic on how I do something.
That's fair. Um, and then this is actually not your first book. You have a book that you published in, was it 2008?
That's correct. It's called it's up here somewhere, but it's called Wargaming for Leaders. So I had a long professional career working out of the Pentagon doing real war games for, unfortunately, real wars and wars that didn't happen. And I wrote a book with two colleagues that covered, and in fact, one of the chapters covers the pandemic before there was a pandemic. So we and I've worked with all the people from the WHO, Dr. Fauci, and all that in those guises of around health issues. We did banking, but the first third of the book is particularly me because it was all about the wargaming, Gulf War and all that kind of stuff, and what I did and how to do those kind of things. So this book is specifically not that. In other words, I make a short reference somewhere in there that, look, I wrote this other book and I'm not covering that, in detail, any of that stuff. That this book is specifically about commercial wargaming, a la SPI, Victory Game, GMT, you know, that kind of stuff.
That's really interesting. So, what did it feel like to write a book on your own, like versus with co-authors as a creative process? So the last time around, you had two people to work with, and I'm sure y'all
We also,
negotiated what go to the
we also
book.
had a ghostwriter at the time. I was running a business with 6,000 people, directly or indirectly reporting to me. So I didn't have a lot of time for, this. So we actually had a part of the team was a professional writer who used to work. He was a big editor at the U.S. News and World Report, who is mentioned in the book. And he was, it was all interviews and, it was collaborative, but, the heavy lifting on the writing side was him. So this one is all me, every word of it.
How different did that feel? Like, how long did it take you to pull this book together? And how'd you go about deciding how you wanted to organize it?
So the genesis of the book is my late, very close friend, Peter Perla, was reading one of my Clio Corners. I've been writing Clio's Corner for Roger McGowan's C3I magazine. Again, recently passed away. I'm dealing with helping his son get the his unfinished issue out. Working on that right now. But and Peter said to me, you've over the last decade, you've written a book. You might want to turn these articles into a book. And so I looked at that, and Roger gave me all the files, and I looked, and I had actually 85,000 words, which is already a full length book. But when you write an article, it's got every article's got a beginning, middle, and end to it, and they don't flow into each other. So the process for me, once I decided that I was going to do this, it took about a year, and but I took about 25,000 words out, and I put about 25,000 new words in. So so now it's a coherent discussion, chapters leading to chapters, and in articles I might mention a similar idea in three different Clio's corners over a decade. I pulled that into one place, so there's a coherent narrative. It has one voice now, which it didn't have, just as the separate articles. But I also added a bit about how to, I feel like I have several areas of true historical expertise. And so there's a whole bunch of new material that's never been anywhere about how to design in the ancient Greek period, how to design in the American Civil War and the Pacific War, which are three areas that I'm very strong in and have lectured on for years on, professionally.
So, there are a lot of things in this book that I just kind of want to know more about. Because it was a super interesting read. I actually particularly liked the early parts where you're describing sort of the apprenticeship model of learning how to design games. I
Yeah,
feel
well,
like
Yeah.
I feel like that's a process that I didn't even know could have been a thing. I feel like most game designers now just make a game. Maybe they find a cohort of people who are also making games. So, what does an apprenticeship actually look like in practice, day to day?
So so this is, of course, Simulations Publications Inc., called SPI. If you've ever seen the logo, it's like a hexagon, blue hexagon with an SPI in it. That's created by. So Jim Dunnigan, one of the most prolific and you know most excellent game designers in our hobby. Reuben Simonson was, the one. There were two premier, in my mind, there were two premier artists in the industry who, between them, probably accounted for 90+% of all images you saw, and that would have been Roger McGowan and Reuben Simonson. Now there was other guys, Banner and all those guys, but they were more very specific to a brand. But the prolific nature of SPI. So these two gentlemen created the graphic look and of the industry. So I basically mentored under Dunnigan and Simonson, and I still see obviously Simonson's passed away, but I still have lunch with Dunnigan. I mean, he's in his early 80s and well, just 80, going on 81, but we still have lunch, and we talk, and he's still fabulous. The only guy I still call a boss, and and um, and SPI. So you have a magazine that's being published every other month, right? So 6 times a year. And it had a very firm schedule because we printed, remember, the subscription for S&T magazine back then was 36,000 subscribers. That's a fairly large number so 36,000 times 6, right? We're producing hundreds of thousands of magazines per year. That doesn't include Moves Magazine and later Aries Magazine. And to print that many magazines economically, we would go on to what they would call a web press, which is how you've seen how they do newspapers, like a big magazine.
Yes.
So it's
Actually, it's
like,
my fondest childhood memory. My dad worked for a newspaper.
there you go. But to get so Dunnigan had negotiated a contract with our the people who published, who printed the magazine. We had a very specific window every other month. We had to be on that press then, or we paid all these penalties for not being. We were using their downtime, but that downtime was very specific. And so the magazine caused you to have very strict deadlines for a number of products. 6 games a year, and the magazine was on a very strict schedule. And so when you worked at SPI, and the other phenomena of SPI is every Friday night we had about 50 to 60 people in the offices playtesting our games every Friday. I don't know many companies that I know everybody playtests, but not like this was like an event every week, every Friday. And as a consequence, and that's part of what's in the book, I don't think I have a game until I have written a full set of rules. A lot of designers do it differently, and that's not the wrong way to do it. And with modern tools, it's just a different world. But I don't have a game until I've written a full set of rules, and then I know I have a game. And that's because every Friday I had to hand this stuff to somebody to play test. And early on you could be explaining it with a small group of close confidants to play the game and test it out. But when you get into real play testing, you got to be able to hand people rules and say, "Let me know, let's see how it goes." And so to me, that was part of my process. But I learned it as a production designer, and I put out like 18 games in 2.5 years at SPI. That's that's like a rate that nobody even talks about anymore. And I was not unique. I was the only one. And the reason I got to do that was because of Monster Games. It's in the book. A good designer, a friend of mine, was getting off schedule, and those again, that S&T magazine had to be on the schedule. So I started doing S&T magazines and developing them and quad games. To get there was work. It was a full-time job, and every game had a budget. And so they said, you have to produce, and every hour you had to charge to something. You couldn't just, so you had to use your time very effectively, because it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to sit here, have coffee, and and kill an hour. That hour is your salary, and you better be moving that game ahead another hour in this process.
That is an absolutely wild way to design. Actually, one of the most notable anecdotes from your book was the "I can do a game in 7 hours."
Well, I did it because of
Boast.
my big mouth, but yeah.
um, but so it sounds like you learned how to design like in a
Oh, say hi to my wife. Hey, Carol.
hello. But it sounds to me like you learned a process for design that got you to iterate and like create prototypes quickly.
Hmm.
But also in terms of apprenticeship, like how does one game designer advise another? I mean, as you mentioned in your book, right? You design games the way you do it, and there's no necessarily right way. So, what kind of, I guess, guidance did you get early on,
So,
especially?
so I work very closely with Jim Dunnigan, and and see, let me describe the role of a developer at SPI. Okay, so in today's world, every company does it. I don't know what a developer is like at Leader Games, and every company does it differently. Um, Notable misfires in the industry usually occur when the designer brings it to a certain level and then the publisher just takes it and jams it out the door, and you see that all the time. And then there's all this, there's some. Yeah, I'm not talking about errata. Every game has some level of errata usually, and that's true of books and computer game. Everything, there's always a little. But I'm talking about where there's some like the game doesn't. There's a place where the game doesn't work, and nobody saw it because there was no development. But at SPI, Dunnigan, and I described it like I would go into his office. He said, "Come here. I got a game I want you to develop." Yes, sir. Walk in the office, and he's sitting in. He had the corner office, and he's sitting there with a cigar. Remember, this is the old days. You smoke in your office. Cigar smoke is in there, and he's got this metal cabinet where you can pull out drawers, and it's the size of a map. So he's got like stuff in games in there, and on top of it, he had a piece of paper, and he'd go, "Here's how this game works." And here are my notes. It'd be 2 or 3 pages. Finish it. So being a developer, even though I didn't design the topic, I didn't decide the topic and the basic core mechanic of it. After that, it was all developer. Not just me, like Joe Blakowski and John Butterfield and Eric Smith. All the guys that from that era. That's how we all learned how to do it. And then I would go in my office and I go look at this thing and I get the map out and I'd start to push the pieces around and see what worked and then I had to write a set of rules. Like here it is, right? How do you play this thing? And I'd write a set of rules, and then like when my first guy, I would go to Irad Hardy was head of R&D at the time, and I go to Irad, said, Irad, here are the rules to October War. He'd go, okay, come back in 30 minutes, and he'd go through the rules and go, no, no, yes, yes, no, no, and I'd look, okay, and we discuss it, and I say, well, he said, I don't know about what are you trying to say here, and I go, ugh. He goes, oh, then try saying it this way, So it was an iterative process between the developer and the designer, but the heavy lifting was the developer in that model. And so when I became and the way to design your own games was we had this magazine with a feedback, right? So I'd write, I want to do this game on, whatever, Stonewall, right? Berg did this great game called Terrible Swiss Sword. I want to do a mini Terrible Swiss Sword in the magazine called Stonewall, and I fed back it into the magazine and got a huge feedback. Go do it. And so now I'm designing my own game, and because of it was coming from another system, I didn't really have a developer, so I did the whole thing, and then I show it to Berg, and he'd grumble at me because that's what he always did when he was, and so on and so forth, So, that's to me the process was, you know, here's my big when I did Next War with Dunnigan, which was a very successful game for us. It was like a #1 game. Remember Next War, by the way, for those. There's a couple of games that have been called Next War since then. This Next War was imagine that the Warsaw Pact attacked NATO in 1978, right? So, and a lot of people go, oh, the game is dated because it doesn't have this tank. Well, it was 1978. I couldn't see into 1987, and I didn't see the future. So the game was rooted in 1978, and it had all the forces. And I had developed the air system for. I was going to design the air system for it. And Dunnigan gave me some notes on the naval system, and the game just was a gigantic game at 2,400 counters. By the way, making blind test copies by hand, 2 sides counters, I hand did those. And I made multiple blind test copies, just to be clear. eventually I was able to get a helper guy named Stephen Donaldson to say, Donnie, you go do this for it, But anyway, all that aside, and what Jim gave me originally was I had a, what is the size of a piece of 8.5 by 11? I 8.5 by 11 hexagon grid, which was Vienna. In fact, it's a scenario. The small scenario in the game is the original prototype map that I got, and he said it was handwritten. It's no typing, all handwritten notes on this very clever system. It was a move. He basically had movement combat, and you could overburn a unit out all based on movement points. So you could go into fatigue mode to go further. I mean, it was just one very simple but very clever mechanic. And he gave me a couple of unit values, and I had this piece of paper, and that was it. And I designed that. Later on, it came out at effectively 4 maps. Is like 3 maps and a couple of little side maps and displays and 2,500 counters and 120 pages of rules and scenarios came from that.
So you mentioned here a bit, and then throughout your book, that your methods for prototyping remain decidedly old school. So the first thing I want to know is, like, you kind of describe it in the book, but what the heck is a photostat machine?
I thought I described it, but so
I didn't understand it. Like, it's like
well, so I said to you, it's a camera. It's an actual camera. F-stops and film, and it's in a cabinet. It's a physical camera inside this cabinet. It's like it was about as I'm 6'1". It was about 5 foot high.
okay.
And it had like almost like in an operation, you could put your hands through these sleeves to put your hands inside of it. Because remember, it's a dark room,
Oh my god.
and you would position your image in it, and you would get lights on, and you know get it the way you wanted to. And then when you had it where you want, you could make the image bigger and smaller. You had, remember, you got a camera. It's literally going up and down and changing the focal length. And after that's all done, there's a in the back of it. Imagine there's like a little flip. Remember, it's all dark in here. It's got like a polarized glass, and there's a little bit of a red light like you would in a dark room. And you reach in the back and you flip up this little lid, and you grab a piece of film, and you pull the film physically out of a box that had to be reloaded, right? And I would take the film and I'd insert it into the right place in the thing, and then I take my hands out, and then there's some dials. You go, give it, this much exposure, and lights will go, and it'll go down, and then you'd reach your hands back and take the paper and you put it into this other slot, which was the developer, and physically it would develop the picture. I mean, it was like a one-piece darkroom camera thing. I was quite expert at it, actually.
This is so wild. Like, I would like to try this and just to do it. Like,
You should, yeah. I mean, Redmond taught me how to do it. So again, remember, this is all on the job training. Now, I was always interested in photography, and I had taken it at the new school, and I used to be the high school photographer for sporting events. So I had I used to go to events, and I had a little press. I used to be able to go to the Madison Square Garden. I used to do tennis matches, inside tennis matches at Madison Square Garden. I had a press pass even from my high school of all places. And I would take these, and I was very good with black and white film. Remember, color film doesn't work in a in the school newspaper is black and white. So everything was black. I was very good at black and white film. And so when I got to SPI, and Redmond recognized that I had this, because he was very big camera, but he was a big camera guy. He took lots of pictures. He always walked around with this camera that had a telephoto lens like 12 feet out. And so once he knew that, one day they were shorthanded, and he comes down and he goes, "You come here." "Yes, sir." So I walked down. He goes, "You're going to do this," and he showed me how to use the photostat machine. And then thereafter, that was like one of my side jobs. I would get asked, somebody say, "Hey, I need you to shoot this for me." And remember, this is everything that SPI is on the timesheet, right? So if somebody
Yeah.
wanted me to do this film thing for them, I could charge 30 minutes of time to their game project to give them, that kind of thing.
That is fascinating. Were you ever tempted to not charge time in order to just put more time into a game? Or is that
Oh no, let's be clear. On my games, there was no chance that I used to show up at work. It's a long story, but I used to show up at work around lunchtime, and I would leave around 1 in the morning. So I was 20, 21, sorry, 21. I was in New York City. I was 21, and where I lived, there was a rock band called Lover, who actually was picked up for a while by Boston's manager. So they were like a big deal in New York City. And I used to roadie for them a little bit in the city, and they were up all night playing their damn instruments. So I couldn't sleep normal hours. So I started hanging out with them in the village till dawn, go to sleep, and show up at the work at noon, go to 1, and then we'd all show. Nobody even went to the village until like 1 or 2 in the morning those days. And I would hang out in the village. I used to see Al Pacino all the time with his girlfriend around 3 or 4 in the morning at this bar we used to hang out at. But that was my lifestyle. For a 21-year-old, it was a lot of fun.
So, I feel like prototyping for a magazine game with more limited components would be quite a different experience from something like we were mentioning, like over 2,000 counters for a game.
They
So,
had a budget. I mean, the Next War had a much bigger budget than did October War.
so if you're still doing things by hand with that number of counters, how do you get from your kind of old school prototype with a lot of writing on it to something that is printable in a way
Oh,
that's not going to make everybody crazy?
so I don't have an example here, but imagine Redmond had, the art department, but Redmond created it. It was a piece of paper, and it was a blue line piece of paper, so it had like what is it? I remember 22 lines. You had to type within the boundary of this piece of paper, and you know each line, and you roll, and you if it had more than like, and remember we had something called whiteout, right? If you made a mistake, you had to white it out and type over it. And it was a rule, like if it was more than like about a half a dozen whiteouts, you had to redo it from scratch. It had to be cleaner. And then, so to do a counter, you would go like, let's say, for anybody who doesn't understand, you've got a division would have two X's, right? So the first line would be XX space over XX. And so let's say there's 10 counters. So you'd have 20 X's, arrayed across the first line. Then the next line would be, it's a 497, 497. Then the next line. And so you're literally typing out the counter sheet line by line on this piece of paper, and you give it to a typesetter who would literally put it up and go, and then that would create a piece of film, and then the artist would take it and strip out the numbers and place it, and you would have made a notation infantry, like INF, and they would know to put the infantry symbol and not INF. And
Wow.
so 10, so let's say you could get 200, you could maybe talk about 200 counters per piece of paper. So you would have a counter sheet. You'd probably have like 25 pieces of paper for one side of the counters. And remember, there's backs of the counters, so you have to have those. So you'd have about 50 pieces of paper would be the counter mix for the game.
Good God. This is I'm fascinated. Like I'm currently like learning how
This
to
is
use
like
tabletop simulator better.
This is like one step past cuneiform on clay tablets. Okay, this is like just one step past that.
Let me get my stylus. All right. So one other thing I kind of want to touch on that appears in multiple chapters in your book is solitaire play. So actually, starting at chapter 5, I marked it because I just thought it was so interesting. That in 1976, strategy and tactics feedback indicated that almost 6 out of 10 subscribers are playing most of their games solitaire. So I think that people think of solo gaming as something that's more recent, like, oh, it was the pandemic and I was alone, I started solo gaming. But war games have had solo gaming forever. So how did you approach solitaire earlier in your career? And then how has the need for or interest in bots like followed you throughout?
Okay, so it's in the book, so I'm not going to read all of it. But
Yeah.
basically, SPI, when I was still in college, did operate. There might have been something. Remember my experience. So when I say something is the first, I'm not saying that historically from the beginning of time. It's based on my experience. So the first S&T game that I ever encountered that was truly solitaire. So up to that point, if you wanted to play solitaire, you just play both sides. Like, I'm Alexander the Great, now I'm Darius. Now I'm Alexander the Great, now I'm Darius, whatever the scenario would be. And you just play it out, and you were playing it for the interact. See, I'm sorry, I'm going to back up one more step. So the question at the beginning, the end of the day is what makes a war game superior, a historical war game superior to a book about history? What you say? Well, this is just entertainment. Well, in a book, a military history book, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about a novel or something like that. Um, they will describe, all this movement and geography, and they did this and they did that, and the book communicates that, accurately, hopefully, but it communicates it one way. But it's like reading a book about. Did you ever read what's his name's book, Hunter Thompson's book about Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas? You ever read that book? You know the book I'm talking about?
I do. Yeah, my parents are both
Yeah. Okay.
retired journalists. So
Yeah. Okay.
yes.
So yeah, of course. Remember, your parents are my age, so so just to put it in perspective, so that's a book about a good writer, kind of a crazy guy, but it's his journey from the East Coast to Las Vegas and all the nonsense that goes on in the book. So imagine a book about history is like your grand driving your car to Las Vegas or wherever you're going militarily. When you play a war game, you actually get to drive the car. You actually get to move the pieces and go, oh, now I see where the river is in an inconvenient place, and I can't do all sorts of stuff in history doesn't make sense. Like Burnside's Bridge at Antietam, you realize it's just one kind of regiment of Confederate sharpshooters. But if you've ever been to Burnside's Bridge, just sitting like up on this hill looking down the bridge and just shooting down on these guys. And when you play that in the game, you go, I get it. And now I understand why this is possible. Otherwise, it makes no sense. So that's what a game does really well. So now going to the solitaire piece, so people were playing the games to drive both cars to see what was going on, and so they were using it as a form of interactive history. And remember, all war games are alternate history. If you want the real history, you read a book. But if you want alternate history or even learning how it happened, and it's always been sort of a general view that although the game could go many different directions, it had to be bounded at least somewhat by the historical situation, reasonable, and that the historical path was somewhere in there. If it was resident within the set of things that could happen, the historical was in there also. So that's kind of the basis of these games. So when you're doing a solitaire, so we were playing them that way, and then SPI came up with Operation Olympic, where you were the American forces invading the island of what is it, Kyushu, the southern island. It was called Operation Olympic, and the Japanese were now the first time it was like the first bot that I've ever encountered. So there was, and the key rule was the Japanese doctrine rule. So as you're doing your thing, the Japanese had a doctrine, which is the bot rules of how they would get in your way and all this kind of stuff. And that was really and then that was successful. And then they did Wolfpack, where the convoy, you were the U-boats, but the convoys were, sailing across the ocean. So that was even easier because they're going to do certain things to defend themselves. They're going to move, but you could deal with that. So that's really kind of the beginning of bots, right? To have a artificial opponent. So the first time I ever did a solitaire game was Dunnigan for about a year was the editor of Strategy and Tactics magazine. Again, when I was no longer at SPI, I was I was working down in Washington at the time, and it was called the Peloponnesian War. And the thing that always bothered me about the bots was I didn't think they were very good opponents. I always felt like I was doing better just playing both sides, and I was getting out of some people like that. I didn't particularly resonate to that. So what I came up with was you played yourself, but within a context that, if your side is winning and you're beating the heck out of the bot, you would now periodically have to flip to the losing side and try to recover against yourself. So it solved the problem of how do you get a long war, because you're always like every side's getting their highs and lows, because when you're running the show, you technically should be doing better than not always the case. And so that was my first bot. And then, and then the other thing we recognize, which I talk about in the chapter, is there are different kinds of bots, right? So some people are looking for a, computer generated really clever opponent, which I think is not normally the case, right? Uh, you're looking for just coherent play. I mean, look at the what is it called? Cole's Clockwork Prince in Oath.
Yes,
Yeah,
I'm
that's
working
a
on its
very
successor now.
well, yeah, but it did a good job of giving you circumstances to react to. So it was fun. You got to experience the game. Uh, but it's a decent opponent, but it's not a great opponent, right? It does a good job. I mean, it's not like playing against Cole, right? Cole's gonna be better at it. I would at least assume. Um, so that's an opponent bot, right? Now, when I did Erasmus for Empire of the Sun, I wasn't looking for, I mean, it is an opponent, no question about it, but I was trying to teach strategy. I was actually trying to teach you how to play the game well, which is a different intent of the bot. So the idea was people go, well, I don't understand how to do this. I don't understand what good strategy is. So I created good strategy for both sides, and you can play against good strategy. And by playing against good strategy, you could get better as a player. And so that was my intent. Now, of course, it's also an opponent, but I didn't hold it requires you to still do some work. So it's not a truly hands-off solitaire system like Clockwork Prince is, to give you, uh, uh, I just finished. I was telling you. I don't know if you were recording it, but I just finished. Right behind. The reason I'm pointing over there is that. Hang on.
Actually, I asked you the question so you'd tell me more on air. So
Yeah, you see over there. There's a table, and Triumvirate, which is going into the art department in about a week. I created a new solitaire system for it, which I call Romulus and Remus. And of course, a Roman game, Romulus and Remus. I got the inspiration for the title because I was actually in Rome about 10 days ago, and everywhere they've got the wolf, suckling, Romulus and Remus symbol of the city is in multiple places. And I said, oh, I got to call the solitaire system that, and that inspired me to do. It actually inspired me to say, well, I'm going to call it that. But then I said, wait a minute, I can actually use that as a metaphor. So in Triumvirate, it is meant to be an opponent, right? So it's not teaching you good strategy, but it's supposed to play different strategies. So Romulus card is like the mandatory card. And if you've ever looked at a chess program, the first thing I wrote one when I was in high school. When you do a chess program, the first thing you have to do is, am I about to lose the game in checkmate? You got to check, is my king about to be destroyed? And that's the first thing a computer has to look at. Am I about to be checkmated? Then the other thing it asks is, am I about to checkmate the other guy? So first thing you check is the game about to end? So Romulus handles where's the game at right now towards the end part? Somebody about to win. If you're about to lose, stop them. If you're about to win, win. That's what it's basically saying. But then if none of those, and it also says, when you're faced with these circumstances, this is how you choose and whatever. That's Romulus. Remus is a personality that the bots get. And since it's a 3-player game, you can play 2 humans with 1 bot or 1 human with 2 bots. It's the same exact system. So you draw a personality card for each of the non-player characters, NPCs or bots. And like one might say, man of the people. So that bot, when it's a man of the people bot, is going to try to, do things that ingratiates it to the people of Rome more than going on campaign and killing, provincials. Whereas one says it's the great general, now you're going off and trying to, win triumphs in the field. So they act differently. And periodically during the game, when there's an election or when a human settles an issue, you get new personalities. So you don't get the same personality for the whole game, but it doesn't happen all the time, depending on the game. And so Romulus and Remus is playing against you. And embarrassingly now, I've played it 3 times in the middle of a 4th game with the system. I've lost 3 times to none so far. So I haven't beaten my own system yet. So I'm feeling like it's not terrible.
yes, we'll get you a my bot is an honor student like bumper sticker.
Oh, I definitely need that. Yeah. So,
So
but
do
I think
the Romulus and
the
Remus
point
cards?
is a bot has, in my mind, has different functions. It's like it's an opponent. It's there to teach you the game. It's there to teach you strategy, make you a better player. But I think in all cases, especially with multiplayer games, it's the thing market-wise that says to somebody, well, I'm buying a game that's a 4-player game, but I at least can get it to the table and enjoy it, is probably the biggest marketing reason for a bot these days. Otherwise, somebody says, well, why am I going to buy a 4-player game? I'll play it once a year. So you have to have at least the belief that I can play it by without anybody around, or I can play with just one friend and we can fill in the blanks.
Yeah. Is solo gaming something that you personally enjoy, or is it something that you've developed skill in because of the market and industry you work in?
Well, I've always been a solitaire player, as I said, but I play Empire of the Sun and For the People. There are right now in my house there is an Empire of the Sun set up. It's in 1944 right now, and I play for the narrative. Right, I just had a gigantic invasion of Truk and a big naval battle, and it was just fun to do. And so that's what I'm experiencing, a narrative, but I'm playing it solitaire. I don't, I'm looking to play both sides well. Same thing with For the People. Uh, Bots for other games, particularly in multiplayer games, I think it is a marketing thing. Because it's very hard to, playing Fire in the Lake with all four sides can be almost tedious at a level. So having a bot, if you want to play it solo, at least takes a lot of the lift, takes some of the mental lift off of you, who you are and what you're trying to do.
That's fair. So I want to ask a question about, I guess, how you position yourself in your book. So you're a man who's lived many lives. You've had a lot of different jobs. You've done a lot of really interesting things. Like, you could have presented yourself as just somebody who was there, like the dawn of wargaming, or somebody who's wargamed for the DoD. But you chose to do your subtitle an historian's view of wargame design. So why was it important for you to claim that mantle for the purposes of this book?
Well, I don't know if I'm claiming a mantle. I'm sort of stating a personal view.
Yeah,
Again,
yeah.
you can't put a mantle on you. You can do what you want, but no, it's how I come to wargaming. In other words, I'm more interested in the history than I am in the wargaming. Basically, I was trained as a historian, and I will tell you that subtitle has pissed off all the academic historians who think that you're not a real historian unless you have a PhD. I also have a master's, by the way, just to be clear. I'm not just an undergraduate. Um, and I published many historical works. And you could say, well, and by the way, and I've lectured and taught history for the Naval War College and Georgetown University and Columbia University. So it's not like I'm some hick running around, and I've been paid to be a historian. So I think I can claim the title legitimately, because what makes you a professional? Anything. You get paid to do it. That's the now and by the way, and I'm actually writing my PhD dissertation right now, except that I'm not going to get a PhD. I'm just going to write it anyway. That's my next book, is actual real history book that I was going to do. I was accepted into a PhD program, but in your early 60s, blowing 7 years to get a piece of paper that you don't need didn't make any sense to me at the time. So I'm still going to write the book. See, I don't need any permission to write a book. That's what I like about being self-employed. I can do what I want. So I am writing a book. It's the impact of Jomini on Civil War generalship is basically the title of the book. But it's American Civil War.
All right, so you chose Civil War and not your true roots of ancient Greece.
I have, first off, I was not born during ancient Greece, but it was what I focused on in college. But even before I went to college, remember, as I said in the book, in 1961, I was 5 and going on 6. And no, it was 6 going on 7. But the point of the story is that was the centennial of the American Civil War. They were, the last people to die who were in the Civil War had just died while I was still alive, actually. I was very little, but there were some of them still around when I was born. And so the Civil War was always my first, and that's what got me into the hobby, was the American Civil War. So I've always that's my true, I picked up the ancient thing in college. The Pacific thing was just an interest, through most of my life that I picked up. And my uncle was in Guadalcanal, so I used to listen to all the stories. But it was the Civil War that was always my first, that's what got me into wargaming more than anything else. And so, and I know quite a bit about it, actually. So
I also just found it interesting because you make it very clear in the book, like, this is my opinion, this is the way I do it. There's a lot of references to experts and their opinions, and experts is in quotations. So, like, the book is for your grandkids, but you're also in dialogue, I guess, with I guess the discourse around war games now.
Mhm.
So I feel like we're in a time where people argue about what a historical game is versus a war game, and about definitions and about who gets to do what. To what extent did all of this inform, I guess, some of the posturing that you do in the just to kind of make it clear that you're trying to express your opinion in interaction with other things that are happening
Well,
out
I think that I I'm trying not to I'm trying to be authentic about how I look at something, so I can only give my own opinion. I'm not doing research into other people's opinions. The book has no research in it about how anybody else does anything. I mean, I've played a lot of games, but I didn't go through a lot. I interviewed 30 people who are game designers, and that's not this book.
there. Right.
That's not what this book is about. Um, the the point is that I come from a time when you had to ask me what a photostat machine was, right? Like you're going, what the hell is that? So I come from a different skill set than people who are. I'm 70 years old, so people who are 40s and 50s have a totally different thing. I'm way before the social media age, and so I'm sort of identifying that you know I'm not trying to create controversy. So by the way to do that in my mind in today's world, you say anything, everybody goes they freak the hell out. Nobody can argue with me about what I think. That's how I kind of. So my perspective is I want to make it very clear to people who are looking for a fight that you can fight with me all you want, but you can't tell me what I think. And so I sort of tuned out the whole social media piece of it, and you've seen no controversy around the book around that because there's nothing to be. See, I stayed away. I didn't want that. I just wanted to say what I wanted to say, and I didn't want to have a bunch of noise from a bunch of losers who don't know what they're talking about. So I avoid that. That's how I look at it. And I've even read some reviews where the the person goes on and on about the book that I should have written. The answer is I didn't write that book. So good for you. Read the book you want, write the book if you want that book, but that's not the book I wrote. So when a reviewer goes deep into, you know, this is not the book I expected it to be, well, the answer is that's your problem, not mine. And that's typical of this era.
So, just as somebody who's kind of been in the wargaming scene, both pre and I guess post the rise of lots of social media and online chatter about war games, I think on the one hand, I feel dependent on the internet to talk to people about my work, to find out about other what's happening. Do you think it's been a net good or a net bad for designers and their work?
You know, as a historian, it is what it is. I mean, it's not whether you know, things are evolving the way they're evolving has nothing to do with me. It's just happening. Stuff happens. I can only, do I think it's good or bad? Well, one, I at least have a vehicle to tell people what I'm doing, which is I think, I don't know, what do I have? 12 followers or something on Twitter and 18 on Blue Sky or something. So those dozen people are excited to hear whatever the hell I'm doing. But that's not the point. It's just that's the only way. We have no advertising budget. I mean, GMT does a great job. They do. Rachel Billingsley does all the social media stuff, and if I give her anything, she pumps it out there, and 30,000, whatever, 100,000 people look at this stuff. But at least I now have a direct link from me to my audience, which is cool. Then you went on about the definition. I think that arguing, it's the old Shakespeare, rose by any other name would still smell as sweet, right? So you can call whatever the hell you want, And I'm very clear that it's about historical war games because, and I even talk about, I love Star Wars. There's a Star Wars Rebellion game. It's a great little game. Not little, it's big actually. And Lord of the Rings and Dune, War for Arrakis. I love those games and BattleTech stuff, and they're all about war. Trust me, but they're not historical. Okay, at least not yet. So
Yeah.
so they're war games. They're conflict games. You can call them whatever the hell you want, but they're not historical war games. I mean, it's the two together. So you're at least trying to write an alternate history for history. Historical war games is all about alternate history. And so when you do a historical war game, you're trying to create the circumstances of alternate history. Otherwise, read the book. that's the distinction I make in the book, and that's how the book is focused directly at that and nothing else. And that's the other thing, I think you used to be you were a teacher, weren't you, for many years?
I was, yeah, I taught Latin for about 10 years.
Okay, but as a teacher, one of the things you learned when you were going through grad school, the teacher always said, narrow your focus for the paper. Don't let it become, don't boil the ocean. Narrow your focus. Narrow your focus. So I purposely tried to narrow the focus of the book to an historian's view of wargame design. That's what the book is about, and that's what I focused on. And I think it's always for others to say whether I was successful or not, but I was happy with the outcome. So that's all I can say.
So, as a historian, do you think about how your work will be received in the future? And if you do, what do you hope people take from it after we're all gone and we're an artifact now? I always wonder about this.
So, oh wow. So that's very, boy, Liz, that's a heavy thing for a Tuesday morning. Um, so, Frank Chadwick, who I actually quote in the book, you know, I'm friends with Frank Chadwick, but I haven't seen him for years, and I wish him well, and he seems to be doing fine. Frank once said, I can find the quote, but I wrote the exact quote in the book, so if I misquote it, it's just because I'm not opening the book. But he basically said that a game is a designer's argument for the outcome. That's more or less what he said. So I think that's that is the point that I'm trying to get to when I design a game. I think it says it very well. Is that I did. In fact, I'm wearing my Rebel Fury shirt. Hang on, can you see it?
Oh yeah, Rebel Fury.
So, let me talk about Rebel Fury for a moment, and as a way to answer your questions. I find answering a question in the abstract doesn't really help anybody. So Rebel Fury is specifically a Civil War game at the grand tactical level. So, and if you look at people on, influence like yourself and the Players Aid guys who I love, and and all these Mo and Mo's Gaming Table and Gimpy Gamer and all those guys, they're great. I like them. We interact well. But when you hear them talk about the grand tactical level, they kind of go, it's somewhere between tactical and operational, right? So nobody really understands it. So and by the way, the next issue, the definition of the grand tactical, I'm going to use, going back to my book I'm working on, is maneuver combinations prior to enduring a battle. That is what the grand tactical level has always been defined. It actually has a real definition in the military, and that's what it is. Rebel Fury is a grand tactical. And Rory writes, I love the maneuver, but the combat, I don't know. So the problem is that Rebel Fury is, in fact, a historical. It's my argument about why it came out the way it did. And I would challenge anybody who knows anything about the Civil War. If you could name 20 assaults that worked in the Civil War, you would still have fingers or toes left over. So most attacks in the Civil War don't work. And when people play the game, they learn that, hey, most of my assaults don't work. It's like, yeah. And so from a gaming perspective, they feel like, oh, the dice are deciding the outcome. The answer is no. 1 out of 3 assaults succeeded. The other 2/3 don't. So if you don't hit a place over and over again, eventually the dice will work for you, but only after you lose a lot of people. That's the American Civil War that I want people to understand. I don't know that that has been unpopular with some, because we lied to them in the gaming industry for decades about that. We told them that you could attack successfully in the Civil War, and they went, oh, this is great. But it's not how it really was. You ever hear Pickett's charge? I mean, it's just how it is. And so the game is my argument about how things came out. And that's why everybody loves the maneuver, because it's the grand tactical level. It's maneuver combination before and during a battle. So you get all of that moving around, and people love that. But then they go, I can't knock the guy out of position. The answer is you got to make the other guy attack you. That was the trick. And that's when you start to learn about the American Civil War. I got to get there before you do, so you have to knock me off. I don't have to knock you off. That's the key. And nobody likes that. I don't know if nobody likes that, because we're already going to have another volume of it, so they couldn't hate it that much. And more importantly, I designed it to be my Mark Twain equivalent of I wrote you a shorter letter. I put a lot of effort into really getting it down to. Dunnigan once had a phrase that has been sort of a hallmark of my design career that I got from him. You remember, everything I got directly from him. He said it to me. I said to him, how do you know when you have enough in the game? He goes, keep it simple, smartly. And once you understand what that really means, you can really design some really cool games. And so when I think about that phrase, I design really good games. And I like to think I design really good games. But you got it, and it's the old joke. It has as much complexity as I wanted it to have. But I wanted very specifically here to have a game that you could play in 2 hours, and like the old blue and gray quad. So my joke used to be, you have lunch, you play the game, you watch football at 4. That's my metaphor for Rebel Fury, and everybody I've seen online has achieved that, and they're playing it. And when I go to conventions now, I see people playing Rebel Fury instead of longer games because they can actually play it. I saw you at SD HisCon. There was a lot of Rebel Fury going on, extemporaneously, because they could sit down, play a game, and go play your game or some other person's game afterwards. So that's what I was going for. So it's, but Rebel Fury is my argument about how things came out. And going back to Frank Chadwick's point.
Yeah, so just one more question on that before we go to softy questions.
Anything you want.
You mentioned in the book that you'd kind of gone back, I can't remember the title of the game, but you'd gone back to a game that you designed like 30 years before, and you were engaging with yourself as a younger designer.
Oh, Pacific War.
Yeah, that's the one. Do you think that do you still agree with earlier versions of yourself, or do you think that your more recent work is more representative of what you really think?
I think that. So when I never even intended to republish Pacific War. It was an 11-year journey. I finally just got pissed off, and I got it from GMT. But I don't feel like going through that whole journey here. But the misunderstanding around Pacific, if I was doing, the only difference between Pacific War that I republished and if I was doing it fresh from now is I wouldn't have the time to really go as crazy as I did. But so right now, like if you see like any game series, right? So imagine any game series you can imagine. I don't want to name one because I don't want to make anybody upset. But like if you have a game that has like, Great Battles of History. We did, Berg and I did, Alexander, and I did Alexander, and then we did, SPQR, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like 13 or 14 volumes later, we had a body of work there. Pacific War, if it came out today, it would be a series. In other words, I'd first give you the Guadalcanal campaign, and then it'd be this. So the game would literally have, 12 volumes to it. But when I did it back at Victory, it was a one and done philosophy. So basically, Pacific War is a game system that is an operational level and even gives you the war in one box. And so in today's world, you'd have to buy 13 boxes to get what's in that one box. And so when you say, would I have done it differently? Yeah, marketing wise, I would have done it differently, but it is what it is. And it is it's a really good operational game of the Pacific War. And quite frankly, I'm just as happy with it now as I was then. And I've been playing it for, 40 years now. But how I looked at things then has evolved. Of course it is. I mean, I was like, I was 31. And now I'm, of course I changed, but would I design that game now? I'm not that person. I'm a different person. So it's not like I think I'm better or worse than I was then. I'm just different. But when I developed the game, I had to go back in my mind and say, what the hell was I thinking 40 years ago? and luckily I have notebooks of notes, and I actually went through my old notes and I said, okay, I see what I was doing there, and okay, that's cool. I validated a lot of it, and I fixed a few things that were bothering me. But overall, the game is pretty much, Kai Jensen helped me rewrite the rules. People are still upset about it's a very intricate game. It's just a very asymmetrical, intricate game, and people call it complexity. I call it being intricate. But once you know how to play it, example when. I was at GMT East when the game Pacific War was published, and a bunch of, I was playing with a bunch of fellows who had played it in its earlier guides, but they hadn't touched it in, decades. And it took us about 3 hours to play the Coral Sea scenario. And the next day, my good friend Gary Gonzalez, the Gons, we sat down and played the same scenario because the pieces were already sorted out, and we finished it in 90 minutes. So it's being that it's intricate doesn't mean it's long. It just takes, how good are you at it? And as I've always said, 3 hours, I don't care how complex a game is, 3 hours is 3 hours. And all my games have 3 hour scenarios or less in them, always. So if you got 3 hours, you can play one of my games. Now, if you want to play the whole campaign game of Pacific War, you should be in prison because that's the only way you'll have the time.
Okay, this led me to one more question. So you talked about taking notes.
As much as you want. I got nothing to do.
I have to go to work, but I could call it's professional development right now. I'm getting mentoring.
Schedule anything you want.
So okay, so
I'll write Cole. Leave. She has a hall pass from me, Mark.
Okay, so you mentioned taking notes. This is something that I am terrible at. I always think that I'm going to take notes, and I always get a notebook, and I think I'm going to take better notes. And I really wish that I had a better note keeping system so that I could look back at my own designs later and think about it. What kind of notes do you keep? And what do you recommend that'll actually be useful down the line for people who want to record their process better?
I think I'm tall enough. Give me a second. Here's one that's lower. Hang on a second. What is this?
Oh, that's a binder.
For the people, baby. What do we got here?
Oh, man. So you got a binder with dividers.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, my Lord.
And by the way,
take me back to high school.
Over there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. I can, within my visual range right now, there's 25 binders.
Oh, Lord. So are they structured all the same pretty much? Like, do you have set sections that like always make it?
In fact, I even have the labels already printed out.
Really?
Yeah, there's a first section is always the rules. Then it's the scenarios. Then it's historical notes, or order of battle, then historical notes, and then other stuff, miscellaneous. Yeah, always.
That is fascinating. So do you like just make the binder right when you start a new game and you just pop things in?
Mm-hmm. In fact, I already have downstairs 3 binders that just have the tabs in with no word, no paper. And I have a 3-hole punch, by the way, for the, after I write something, I shove it in the binder.
I need to make a request for a future Cleo's Corner column. Okay. I'm just very interested in people's note-taking system. So when was your earliest binder, and like how did you get into this system?
Wars over there. That's my first game.
Yeah. Oh wow. So you've been doing this from the start.
I would pull it down, but where it is, I might get. It's literally. I'm 6'1", but it's closer to 10 feet in the air on the top shelf that I had to get there with a ladder. I had to get a stepping stool to get up that high, but I can't move the camera. It's just right there. I mean, I can even know which one it is. It's that one over there, and Jerusalem 67 is next to it, and all of them are over there.
That's awesome. Is that something that you inherently were interested in doing, or is it something that Jim Dunnigan also does and you learned it as part of your apprenticeship?
I honestly, Jim Dunnigan would give me a piece of paper and he'd go back to smoking a cigar. But Jim was actually one of the earliest adopters of computer. So he has computer notes that go back, 50 years. I mean, we had a Burroughs computer the size of a small golf cart that he ran the company off of. And we used to use it. He tortured me with Next War. He wanted to use it as a word processor, so I could only do it. That's why I was working to 1 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't do it during business operations because they were usually running the company. So, and the Word, it's not Word, but the editor, the text editor, which is all ASCII anyway. You could only look at one sentence of the rules at a time. You would change one letter, and it would take about 4 to 5 seconds to accept the change. Now do that for 120 pages of rules. Oh boy, that was fun.
my god, that's awesome.
Oh, and when I walked into Redmond with the printout, he looked. I can't tell you exactly what he said, but he more or less said, "I am not dealing with Jim Dunnigan's experimental BS." Is what he more or less said. And I had to take the pages and cut them out and tape them onto his special little form so that they would typeset them. I mean, it was like so much fucking work to do it this way. I can't believe it. I can't even believe it. Now, I will say, I have. Is it here? I don't even know if it's physically in the room. Yeah. Now, for these days, I've modernized. This is what they call a remarkable tablet. Have you ever seen?
Oh yeah,
It's fabulous. Kai Jensen sold me on this. So give me a second. I don't want anybody to know my.
yeah. Non-breaking space is obsessed with his as well.
Yeah. So there's all my current projects, and if I go into Triumvir, here's Triumvir. There's all my design notes and the rules, and I can put the PDF rules right in there. I edit them right here.
Wow.
And so this has been my new thing. This is my new jam, and it's been fabulous. But and that's probably going to replace all of this paper. It's much more portable. I take it on the road with me. So I have now jumped. So I've gone from binders to this, but I still print out the stuff and put it in binders. But at least I can write it. I like writing. I'm used to writing. I mean, again, it was manual typewriters, right? White out.
Yeah, well, they say writing is better for your mental processing anyway, so there may be something to that.
So my mother was a secretary, and when I was in 10th grade, she made me take typing, which nobody took in those days. And at one time, and the two things you get scored on in typing class is one, accuracy. Oh, three things: speed, and remember it's manual typewriter, how even the hit of the key on the paper was. So at one time, this pinky could put a hole through a wall with the semicolon. I mean, you gotta break that bad boy down. That's how it is, So, like I said, I'm just like a dinosaur walking around amongst mammals right now.
Yes, but good for you. Dinosaurs are cool again. So
yeah. We took my granddaughter to the Museum of Natural History. She actually was afraid. They were so big. She's only 2. She looked up and she was actually frightened by how big. They're big. It's like she was a little bit taken aback.
Oh, and one day she's gonna read Wargames According to Mark and find herself.
Well, actually, if you look at the first in the very first page, it's her when she was not even 1. I had the manual and I was editing and I was watching her, and she liked ripping the pages. I don't she just thought that was cool, and then all of a sudden she opened it correctly and she was looking at it, and I took that picture, but she just loved going like this with the how you take paper and you rip it. She loved that. She was 1. What am I going to tell
you? We'll see how she feels when she's 21.
I hope I'm around to see
it. All right, so time for just a couple softy questions here at the end. One, I always ask, what have you been playing recently that you've really enjoyed?
I take it not the stuff I'm working on.
You're allowed to enjoy your own work, but yes, one other thing.
I haven't had. Well, I got to in Italy. They published Churchill in Italian, so I got to play Churchill in Italian with a bunch of Italians. That was kind of fun.
That's awesome.
I've been playing a lot of Triumvir. But for fun, I mean, Empire of the Sun. But there used to be this. I don't know if you're they still sell them as hero clicks, like you play like the Fantastic Four and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, there used to be something called Mech Warrior, and I used to work with Jordan Wiseman and the Whiz Kids guys. Back when they were making it's out of print now. They stopped doing it around 2007. But because I was working with them, I have literally a few thousand figures, and I designed this card-driven for them. I designed a card-driven operational game to go with it. And lately, I've just been messing around with that. I've been having a good time playing that, just goofing around with it. Of course, I'm working on Army of the Potomac, which I really like playing. And what else have I been playing? I just pulled out. I always like playing Beast, Dean Essig's battalion combat system. So I was pulling out Kazarine Pass, Rachel Simmons. A long time ago, did a game called a Napoleonic system called Triumph. It's a Battle of Austerlitz, with blocks. It's kind of I've been looking at that again. It seems like about what else have I got going on? That sounds about right.
That's a good docket. And then if people want to join the other 18 people who follow you on social media, where do you like to be found online so people can follow your stuff?
Oh well, I'm at Mark Herman 54 is my Twitter handle. Blue Sky is Mark Herman 54, but then it's got like .blue sky .social whatever. But it's Mark Herman 54. I was born in 1954, so it's easy for you to remember Mark Herman 54. Usually, when they try to give you if you get an email address or something, they give you like a number like 37, which means nothing to me. But 54, I can always remember that one. So Mark Herman 54.
Perfect. Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been awesome to finally have you on, and I really, really enjoyed this conversation.
I hope you liked the book at least. Did you get anything out of it?
I did. Yes, I did get something out of it. It's one of the ones that will go on the shelf and not out of the house. I don't keep all my books, but I'm keeping this one. So,
all right, good to hear. All right, well, have a good one, Liz.
all right, everybody out there, please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.